Hey everybody, this is Scott Moss from PensionSoft. Today, I'm going to take you through a new feature that was added to DB Precision with the latest release. There's a lot to cover with this new feature, so we're covering this one thing in its own video. We're still having the normal update video that we do, just as a separate video. Okay, so the new feature I'm talking about in this video is online pension forms. On the PensionSoft portal, it's going to display as a new button called Authorize Forms. And it allows participants to complete their pension forms online in the portal. This new button doesn't just appear though. There's a lot of stuff that needs to happen first, and I'm going to go over that. Also, everything I'm covering in this video will be available on the guide section of our website. So there's no need to take notes. I want you to just follow along to see how things work. Just do a search on our online help for Authorized Forms Guide maybe, and you'll see it there. But before I dive in, I want to give a brief intro. We've actually been working on this now for almost 2 years. Some people knew how busy we were with this, and when they'd ask me what we were working on, I just tell them, and this is for a portal user, it's basically TurboTax, but for pension paperwork rather than taxes. Now, if you've ever done your tax forms by hand and then switched to something like TurboTax, you'll know that it's a lot easier to do your tax forms with software. And because of that, we believe that once our customers start using this new feature, they'll want to switch all their plans over to it. And for context here, when you look at some of the prior milestones in PensionSoft development, there are a few that really stand out. The initial release of DB Precision, that was in 2005. The first release of the portal, 2008. Release of Worktrack, 2013. This new thing, I believe, is on par with those events. And hopefully when I'm done, you'll see that all those prior milestones really led up to this. This new feature is built on top of everything else we've been doing and really ties everything together with one purpose. And that's simplifying pension administration, but in this case, pension forms. Now, this is really the first iteration of this enhancement though. And while I think it's already awesome, like totally awesome, we expect and want your feedback. The goal is wide-scale implementation. Okay, so I'm going to start by showing you the feature and then working backwards to show you how to get to a person/client to this point. So now I'm logged in. I'm pretending to be a participant here. I see my homepage has a bunch of stuff about my pension. I click on the portal's menu button. I see a bunch of options: BenCalc, data, documents, security. But then I see this new button, Authorize Forms. Then I remember an email I got asking me to log in and complete my forms online, something about Worktrack. It was one of Worktrack's automated emails. What you would do is you can configure the Worktrack system to send an email to the participant directing them to go online and complete their forms. So they go in there and then they'll see a list of all the possible forms that they can complete. Now, if I click on one, you'll see it will bring up in this case, the standard forms package. Long-term, the idea is that we're going to have users have different types of forms that they can complete, whether it's individual forms like the W4P or whether it's termination forms. Ultimately, this is going to be extended to different types of forms, but right now it's strictly for payment processing. Now, on this first page, what we're seeing is the page is really directing you to kind of through the process. It's showing me what I need to have in advance of completing these, what the process is. So once I go through that and I gather all the necessary paperwork, I hit the begin button, and then it really will walk me through the process. It's almost like an interview process, but with some things that I have to certify and make affidavits to. Now, some of the stuff I can sign online. and some of the stuff needs to be notarized, and the system will really walk me through that. Another thing is, as I'm going through the system, the number of options at the top, that forms progress, where we have five options right now. As I answer questions, you'll see that the pages themselves will change. If I elect a lump sum, that will result in one set of questions. If I elect something like a 50% joint survivor or a life annuity, that could take me down a different path. But so as I'm going through, it's validating what I'm doing, and then it's also going to take me through these different steps. So I'll go ahead and answer these questions as if I'm a participant now. Now on this page, I'm making the choice of benefit. You'll see here, it shows all the different options I have. There's also a details button. The idea here is that on the original forms package, the one that's a Word document, that generally will include a one-page illustration of how the benefit was derived. In this case, you can actually attach an archive that will represent that. So when I click on that details button, it's really just pulling up an archive of the, in this case, it's saying it's a benefit estimate, but it would be a final calc. So I'll go through, I can make my selection here. Again, I can sign this form without notarization in this case. Because I picked a 50% joint survivor, it's asking for beneficiary information now. I go through that, I answer some additional questions. This is the withholding page where I have to indicate what my withholding elections are. Now, normally you would ask the participant to fill out a W-4P or W-4R. This is really asking questions that pertain to their situation, and we'll fill out the form for them. What you'll see when we hit this print button at the end, it will actually produce the W-4P for us. So I go through these questions, verify my address, and then my name information is correct. Again, I go ahead and sign it. Here I indicate where I want my payment to be made, whether it's a check to me, whether it's an ACH transfer, for example. I go through and I fill out that information. This information is actually pre-filled, if possible, off of the DB Precision data, as well as other information could be gathered from the initial Worktrack request. So it compiles all the information and pre-fills it in, if possible. If it was a joint account, my spouse would have to sign it at the same time as me. You actually also have the option to have a secondary payee that's configurable, but in this plan, we're allowing for two different payments to be made on one distribution. And so now it gets to the end, and it also indicates what is required. So here it notes that there's proof of birth that's required, proof of marriage, beneficiary proof of birth, state withholding. So that list will change depending upon what selections you've made prior. At this point, you have the option, and this is configurable, but you have the option to actually go ahead and either upload it or use a camera, just like you would on other screens on the portal. So typically you could even, if you had your phone, for example, you could take a picture of your driver's license, picture of your spouse's driver's license, a picture of the marriage certificate. But again, you can configure that to allow that or not through electronic upload. Once you go ahead and fill all that out, you would actually then print the forms. You'll see that the forms are generated right through the portal. That pulls up something that looks like our standard benefit election forms. There's a section for the standard checklist, the explanation of benefit options. Here's where it's showing that I made my benefit election. it shows on forms that are electronically signed, it will show the signature there. And this form, for example, this is the affidavit of marital status. This requires notarization. So the signature would not be valid here. I'd have to actually bring this to a notary. And you'll see in the footer on all the forms that require notarization, it indicates that. So a direct deposit form. So as you kind of go through, you'll see that it has all of the different components of our standard forms package, including at the very end, you'll see there's a W-4P completed. So if it was a lump sum, it would have the W-4R. Here we elected an annuity. At this point, I could save this, I could print it. I would need some of those forms notarized. I would get those forms notarized, and then I would walk through the instructions. I would mail them to the address shown, which also, of course, is configurable. Once I go through and I've done all that, here I'll indicate that I just am sending paper copies just to kind of get through the process. I'm indicating that I will submit the forms. It's verifying that I want to do that, because once I do this, it requires an administrator actually undo this process. I go through and I finish the submission. That completes the step, one of the steps in this case, it's step 2 of the work track. Notification would typically, they get sent out to whoever is working in the organization in your company to administer the plan. They get notified that the participant had completed the process, and it indicated that they had mailed the appropriate forms. On your end, you would then wait for those notarized forms to come in. You would authorize them, and then that would move you through the steps of the work track process. Okay, so I've kind of given you a quick overview of how it works from a user's perspective. What I'm going to show you next is how we set all that up in DB Precision. So let me go ahead and log out, and then I'm going to hop over to DB Precision. So now I'm in DB Precision. I'm going to go ahead and log in. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to show you how to configure the plan sponsor, the plan document. We're also going to create a sample participant. I'm going to get you all the way back to where we were when we first logged in as the participant. Now, what you'll see is in ABC Company, there is a work track task distribution request. And step 2 in this task is the process of completing the forms. Now, previously, they would have filled these forms out manually, sent them in, somebody would have checked them, and then step 2 would have been completed. Under the new process, the idea is the participant completes them online to complete that step, and then somebody still would check those forms when they send in the notarized forms. So if we go in and you look at step 2, you'll see that there is a checkbox here, provide participants option to complete step on portal. Now, prior to the latest release of DB Precision, you wouldn't have gotten past this checkbox, but you'll see now we can check the box and actually go into the settings screen where we configure how those forms are to be completed. So really, what you're going to do is for a sample work track, for a sample plan, and for a sample work track task, hopefully you've got one of those already, you would go in and you would modify, I'm assuming you're going to have a completion step, a completion of the actual forms package. You're going to go modify that so that the participant can now complete it, and then you're going to go into the settings screen. Now, I'm not going to go through all this configuration options in here. There's a help button that will bring you, it will answer most of the questions that you have on this screen. But this series of questions is what is used to configure what we were looking at earlier. Now, again, the idea here is ultimately this is going to be extended out to include other types of forms packages, other types of combinations of forms. But right now, we're just looking at the standard election form. So I expect that this page is going to get larger, probably have multiple tabs ultimately. But right now, this is what we've got. So you go through, you configure that. It's going to be iterative. You're going to go through, you're going to make some changes to that screen, come back to it if you don't like something, but ultimately you'll get to a point where it matches what you're expecting the user experience to be. So you go through, you modify work track. The other key things you need to make sure of is, first of all, if the client's already on the portal, if you'd want to make sure that the client is on the portal. You'd have to enable the internet portal on the sponsor side, but you'd also want to have some benefit exports that can represent kind of that one page benefit calculation that we were looking at when we looked at the details. Here we called it benefit estimate, but so you're going to need to have an export that is accessible on the internet portal. Now, another key thing though is what you want to make sure is that this second option for that export is chosen, because what that's going to do is when you run an export, either through the portal or through DB Precision, a lot of this is described in our help topic or in our guide that I mentioned earlier. You want to make sure that this option here, this benefit calculation results, is selected for that export. So really it's configure Worktrack, as I just showed you, make sure you have an internet export, and make sure that internet export, an internet export showing details of the calc, and make sure that internet export shows that benefit calc results option. So what you would then do is you'd go through and you'd set up a sample. You'd indicate that this person was a sample participant. You'd go through and you'd set it up so that there's enough detail on this person to actually calculate a benefit. Which is, in this case, I just need 1 year's worth of pay. So if I run a calculation right now, I actually get calc results. Now also I'm going to have a beneficiary in here. I want to get all the different options. So let me just pick that real quick. And so now I have a working, I have a calc that works. If I do an export, so it's that benefit estimate that I'm going to run. You'll see that, or actually I'm not sharing the Word document here, but basically it's going to produce a Word document for me. So with both of those in place now, I have everything I need. One thing I want to do though is I also want to, one of the other prerequisites for that button to show up is that I have to have a Worktrack task. And not only do I have to have a Worktrack task, but it has to be on the step that the person can complete. Remember, I said that in this case, step 2 could be completed by the participant. So I have to get that Worktrack task up to that point. So if I go into Tools, Manage Workflow, I'm going to add a distribution task for this person. And so I have these various steps. In other words, I'm going to complete this step up to step 2. So step 2 is now incomplete. This is the step where the participant's actually going to complete the election forms. So I've now gotten that Worktrack task up to that point. Now, one other thing I want to do is I want to attach in order for this to show up, there's 2 other things that have to be done for this Worktrack task. One is the benefit options have to be added to this task, as well as I want to have that export, that calculation export available, that 1-pager, so that when they're completing the forms, they can see the details of the calc. So to do that, there's a couple of different ways I could do it. I could do it in the portal. I could run the benefit estimate through the portal, and in there you can actually attach it to a Worktrack task. Here I'm just going to do it inside DB Precision. You'll see if I run a calc, and again it's 2151 or my termination date and my payment start date. There's a checkbox on the calc results screen that say I want to add these benefit options to a Worktrack task. This has actually been out there for quite a while, but I don't know, you might not be familiar with that. That basically attaches benefit options to the task, so that in fact, if I go back into Manage Workflow right now, you'll see that I have benefits shown. So these are all the benefits that were part of that calc. Another thing I want to do is I want to attach that one-page export to the to this person's work track. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll run a benefit estimate using, again, the 2151 dates. And here I'm going to indicate that I'm saving the results to an archive, and I'm also attaching it to this distribution request. So now I've attached an archive document. So in fact, again, if I go back into this task, you'll see that there's this archive, this BenCalc archive. And if I view it, it would pull up a PDF. Again, because I'm not sharing that, because I'm only sharing DB Precision, you wouldn't be able to see that right now. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a login for this user. So I would log in. I would log in as a sponsor contact, as an administrator, create a user ID and password, and then I'll log in. So actually, I'm going to take a break. You won't see the break, but I'm going to take a quick break, and I'll come back, and we'll be back logging back into the portal. Okay, so I added the portal login for this user that we had just set up. Went through all the additional security questions and changing my password, and now we're at the login screen. So I'm gonna go ahead and log in. And so just like the last login, get brought to the home page, click on the home page button, brings up a menu. You see there's an authorized forms option. I go in there, here's the forms, I go through that process. So this really kind of shows you how quickly you can get to the point where you can start working with the system. And really our hope is that people will do this on a sample plan and start walking through the process and giving us feedback, because we really do believe that this is going to be a difference maker for not only PensionSoft, but for all of our customers. So hopefully you guys start using it and give us feedback. So that really covers it. Again, there is a help topic that it's like a 3-page guide that walks you through everything that we discussed here. I don't think it really necessarily even warrants a guide, because it is pretty easy, but go through that process and let us know what you think. So that's it. Thanks for taking the time. Take care, guys.